In 1976, a newly divorced young mother named Janet Hamill begins navigating the life of a single mother with the help of her supportive father, Stanley, who assists her in caring for her children. They take the toddler to a hospital. Janet and Stanley notice his difficulty responding to auditory stimuli, and hoping to find the cause sooner rather than later, they are deep down terrified to hear. After the test, as the doctor invites Janet and Stanley into her office and tells them the result they have always feared and wished weren't true, her words linger in the air and echo in their mind, forcing them to confront and face the reality. The young toddler is profoundly deaf and hence needs special care. Then, as the Hamills process the devastating news, wishing only the best for Matt, the doctor suggests they should send him to a residential school where he can be around other children with hearing loss and learn sign language. Determined to give his grandson what he considers a normal childhood, Stanley makes a shocking announcement.
Matt's not going to some deaf school. He's going to Loveland Elementary, just like his brother.
By 1984, Matt is enrolled in Loveland Elementary School and attends the special needs class, just as Stanley had insisted. One day, Matt sits by the window, watching other children enjoying themselves on the playground, registers the easy, carefree joy on their faces, and feels a quiet longing to be part of that world until his teacher approaches and calmly prepares him for recess. During recess, Matt sits alone on the playground and continues watching his fellow students playing a game. Then, Matt's face lights up with excitement as a ball is thrown his way, and he quickly receives it. But before he can throw it back, he's viciously tackled down by a boy, while the rest surround him, laughing at him and calling him names. Unable to take the bullying any longer, Matt wrestles his attacker to the ground, pins him down, and starts beating him down until Pat pulls him off and takes his place, facing off with the bullies. Frustrated, Matt shuts the chaos out, runs as fast as he can to the cooling pond in the woods, where he can find solace in the vibration of the water underneath him. Moments later, Pat runs after his younger brother to the woods, collects the hearing aid, heads to the pond, and finds Matt trying to speak out the word that represents his only sanctuary: water. At home, Janet shares her concerns about Matt's future and considers putting him in a residential school, but Stanley once again resists and assures her that her son will have a better future in a mainstream school. Following the promise he made to himself on the day he heard his grandson's diagnosis, Stanley spends time teaching Matt how to read lips, encourages him to speak out loud, sits through grueling practice sessions with him, motivating him to keep on even when the young boy wants to quit, and assuring him that he can achieve anything he sets his mind to.
Lord. Good boy.
Soon, Stanley notices Matt's love and talent for wrestling, and like everything else, decides to back him. To make sure that his grandson gets a fair chance and doesn't get overlooked, Stanley accompanies Matt to school one day and approaches the wrestling coach, Mike. As Matt sits quietly, Stanley negotiates with Mike on the young boy's behalf and asks him to put Matt on the team. Mike initially resists the idea, as he doesn't know how to navigate the matter when it comes to communication and safety. But the determined Stanley doesn't take no for an answer, and, using Mike's romantic interest in Janet, makes sure Matt gets an opportunity to showcase his talent.
How's the fam holding up? How's Janet doing? I was just wondering.
If she's available, I'll tell Janet you said hello.
A few days later at the wrestling practice, Mike pairs Matt with a boy named Martin and writes down the instructions for him before he blows his whistle to start the fight. In the first couple of rounds, Martin overpowers Matt quickly, which concerns the coach and forces him to pull Martin aside and ask him to go easy on the newcomer. However, right before the third round begins, Matt closes his eyes, shuts out the visual chaos, and centers himself. Then, to the excitement of the coach, he pins his opponent down within seconds. Surprised by the feat, all the boys surround the newcomer with cheers he can't hear but can certainly feel, and Matt's face radiates with joy as he finally discovers where he belongs. By 1994, Matt attends Loveland High School, where he remains the star of the wrestling team under Mike. One day, after a fun wrestling practice session, Mike congratulated Matt on his incredible performance and encouraged him to keep up his good work. Afterwards, Matt's crush, Michelle, gives Matt a ride home with her friend Vivian. During the ride, despite Michelle's best effort to include Matt in conversations, he feels left out as she chats with Vivian and keeps to himself, only watching the girl's laughter and gestures from a distance. Taking advantage of this situation, Vivian ignores Michelle's warnings and takes cheap shots at Matt, making fun of him. When the trio reaches their destination, Matt nervously hands Michelle a handwritten note asking her to the prom. Seeing this, Vivian mocks Matt and pressures Michelle to decline his offer. Crushed by peer pressure, Michelle politely declines Matt's request, unreasonably citing the friendship between their parents, which breaks his heart. Later that evening, while Matt stays late at practice, Stanley proudly informs Janet that Matt has received acceptance letters from both Purdue University and Rochester Institute of Technology, RIT.
Well, I think that we should still consider both options.
Well, why don't we let Matt make his own decisions?
A few minutes later, Matt and Pat arrive home, and Matt is ecstatic to hear the news. However, this life-changing news fails to heal his still fresh heart wounds, and after celebrating with his family for a brief moment, Matt retires to his room to nurse his pain in private. Early the next morning, hoping to outrun his racing mind, Matt goes for a run. Sensing his grandson's turmoil, Stanley follows Matt in his truck, catches up to him, and talks to him about the scholarship and Michelle to see where his head is at.
Only happens once. Anything that only happens once is a big deal.
Quickly taking the lesson out of his grandfather's usual tough love approach, Matt summons his courage, jogs to Michelle's house, climbs to her window, and once again asks her out. Away from the toxic peer pressure and impressed by Matt's efforts, Michelle accepts Matt's request and agrees to go to prom with him. On the day of the senior prom, Matt gets ready with Pat's help and drives to Michelle's house to pick her up in Stanley's fancy convertible. Then, after exchanging greetings and compliments, the duo starts their drive to school.
I love this car because I can feel the vibration.
However, during the drive, instead of being impressed by his efforts and the fancy car, unbeknownst to Matt, Michelle starts finding little nuisances and becomes annoyed by the wind ruining her hair. Still unaware of the situation and hoping to spend more time with her, Matt offers to take Michelle for a quick dinner, and the duo heads to a local taco place on their way to school. There, as Matt places his orders and waits, a restless driver starts rushing him, blaring his horns and making a scene. Despite not hearing the horns, Matt understands the trouble from the distressed look on Michelle's face and feels overwhelmed by the sudden pressure cooker situation he finds himself in. Then, unable to stand the situation any longer, Matt walks over to the annoying driver behind him, roughs him up, and scares him into silence. However, this only adds fuel to the fire and frustrates Michelle, who feels embarrassed by the commotion. Hence, the duo rides the rest of the way in utter silence, and as soon as they get to the dance, Michelle excuses herself to the bathroom. Moments later, while Matt waits for Mitchell, Vivian informs him that Michelle hadn't been feeling well and hence called her mother, who came and picked her up, which devastates the young wrestler. Vivian's smug and condescending tone only pours salt on Matt's wounds. Feeling incredibly overwhelmed, Matt ignores the darkness of the night and drives to the cooling pond, in which he lies down and lets the vibrations calm his nerves, quiet the chaos in his mind, and wash the humiliation away. In 1995, Matt joins Purdue University and attempts to assimilate into his new environment. One day in class, the professor orders Matt to sit in front so that he can be closer to his translator, who translates everything the teacher says using sign language. But despite following the orders, Matt has difficulty following the sign language. Hence, he tries to use his lip-reading skills as much as possible and intently follows the teacher's expressions, but fails each time the teacher looks away, which makes the lessons quite challenging. With this stress mounting, Matt loses his concentration and fails to impress his wrestling coach as he keeps losing fights in practice. Despite the difficulty, Matt doesn't shy away from the challenge and continues putting all of his effort into adapting to his new life and responsibilities. But it doesn't get any easier. The lessons continue being elusive, which affects his performance on the wrestling team. And after a few months of such hardship, the coach calls Matt into his office.
I'm sorry. This wasn't an easy decision. This is the Big Ten. Don't take it personally.
Who starts a sentence like that? Like, really? Despite Matt's promise to work harder and get his grades up, his stay at Purdue University is cut short, and he returns home, carrying a heavy burden of guilt and frustration as his chance of achieving his lifelong dream of becoming a national champion feels lost for good. A year later, while Matt works as a mechanic in Stanley's garage, an old high school classmate named Dale comes into the shop to get his car fixed. Then, Matt gets the shock of his life as Dale smugly introduces a pregnant Michelle as his wife, and he dryly congratulates the couple. Then, once the business side of the discussion is concluded, Michelle stays back to speak to Matt.
I want to apologize for ruining your prom.
I think we all know how that feels.
Unbeknownst to his colleagues, this seemingly calm but loaded conversation triggers Matt, and everything from the humiliation of the senior prom night to his university failure floods him in an instant. As Matt struggles to control his racing mind, his colleagues playfully tease him like they always do. But Matt's agitation boils over, and he beats them up before fleeing the garage. Then, hoping to outrun his racing mind, Matt runs as fast as he can on the streets of the small town until Stanley chases after him in his truck and stops him, and the grueling chaos in his mind.
Failed at Purdue.
So what?
I went there for you.
Wow, the way Stanley anchors Matt. Then, before Matt can even respond, Stanley announces that after a long discussion, he and Janet had decided to refinance their house and send him to RIT. Then, hoping to drive his point home, Stanley takes Matt to the school, gets in wrestling gear, and challenges his grandson to a wrestling match. Matt fails to take this seriously and tries to laugh off the challenge, but Stanley quickly swoops in, pins him down, and reminds Matt that he still has a lot to learn. Is there anything Stanley won't do for his grandson? There, as Matt lies defeated by his grandfather, he looks up at his achievements posted on the walls, and his heart flutters with excitement, thinking he might still get a chance to fight for his dreams. In 1996, Matt joins the National Technical Institute for the Deaf, NTID, at RIT. There, on his first day, Matt, who's always felt like the odd one out in his small hometown, is quite taken aback to see numerous other students with hearing loss hanging out at the Deaf Quad, and fluently communicating and having fun with one another in sign language. Taking his new environment in, Matt heads to his dorm and meets his roommate Jay, who is also a wrestler, and soon becomes his best friend and his girlfriend, Kelly. In the next few days, Matt spends his days working out and preparing for the upcoming wrestling team tryouts, studying and getting acclimated. One afternoon, after finding out Matt's weight class, Jay tells him that he will have to face off with the team captain, Rizak, who has only ever lost to the two-time national champion Jason Sloan. Then, as the duo walks around the campus, Matt sees a political science and deaf studies student and activist for the Education of the Deaf Act bill, named Christy, and develops a crush, but puts off meeting her and focuses on preparing for the tryouts. A few days later, at the wrestling team tryout, Coach Ron Gross and his assistant and sign language translator, Coach Cantrell, welcome everyone, and Ron announces that the tryout matches are sudden death, and whoever loses will not make the team for the year. Then, on Coach Cantrell's whistle, the matches are started, and everyone prepares for the face-off, while Matt takes a moment to himself, as he has always done since he was a child, closes his eyes, and centers himself. Meanwhile, in a different weight class, Jay wins his match and celebrates making the team. Jay then cheers Matt on as he proceeds to take on Rizak. In the first couple of rounds, all of Rizak's experience from his many years on the wrestling team comes through, and he easily beats Matt. Then, in the third round, to the sheer excitement of Jay, Matt grounds himself once more, takes charge, defeats the senior captain, and makes the team. A few days later, at a party, Jay hangs out with Matt until he sees Christy arriving. Then, Jay introduces Matt to Christy, who confesses that she came to the party hoping to convince students to vote on the upcoming Senate hearing of the Education of the Deaf Act bill, and reveals that everyone on campus is talking about Matt and his incredible wrestling skills. Then, as the duo hangs out for a few minutes, Matt tries hard to follow the sign language. Soon, Matt is surprised when a student approaches him and hails him for his outstanding wrestling skills and thanks him politely. Later, as Christy proceeds to leave, Matt summons all of his courage and asks her out. In the next few days, Matt spends his time focusing on his studies and wrestling practices until the next competition.
Do they know this is wrestling? Why are there so many people here?
During the competition, like he always does, Matt takes time out to center himself and wins the match. And despite his inability to hear the chants of his name and the cheers of the crowd, he enjoys the glory of his achievement and the excitement of his fans through the vibrations echoing throughout the arena. A few days later, Jay shows Matt a newspaper article about the national champion Jason so that he can prepare himself. That evening, Matt spends hours watching old videos of Jason's fights and learns all there's to know about the champion. Then, one afternoon, for their date, Matt takes Christy to a nearby cooling pond, where they enjoy the vibrations of the water in the ground, get to know each other better, and share their respective take on the peaceful moment. Christy then confesses that at first she had agreed to go out with Matt, hoping to convince him to use his popularity to get people on board for the Senate hearing, and that she's surprised to enjoy his company. After spending hours together, the duo starts a relationship. It's wholesome to watch Matt's transition from isolation to popular jock. During his next wrestling practice, Matt is unexpectedly beaten, and Coach Cantrell pulls him aside and gives him some pointers.
Takedown, reversal, 2 points, escape, 1 point.
Near fall, 2 or 3 points.
Coach.
One night, while Matt jogs, Jay ambushes him to give him the latest update about Jason and motivates him to keep his head in the game and stay focused.
What's your point?
Then, while studying together, Matt shares with Christy that he's working on his signing and confides that instead of the sign language, he was raised with English as his first language.
No, it is, Christy. Doing this for you.
A few days later, with the Nationals only a couple of weeks away, Matt receives a message from Janet, informing him that his grandfather had been hospitalized and is devastated. Frantic, Matt takes the next bus to his hometown and rushes to the hospital to meet with his family and learns that Stanley is still in critical condition. Then, Matt stays by his beloved grandfather's side quietly, hoping that he will recover soon. Then, to his surprise, Stanley summons all his strength and demonstrates that he's been following his wrestling results and that he had been learning sign language for him.
What happened?
Then, Stanley gives Matt his final words of fatherly wisdom and bids him farewell before passing away. Matt is devastated by the loss and remains frozen by the side of the bed, crying for hours. Stanley meant the world to him, and now it felt like the universe was collapsing on him, suffocating him with sheer silence. Unable to take the stress any longer and hoping to outrun the chaos in his mind, Matt goes for a run like he always does when he's overwhelmed, but learns the hard way that this time, the grief is inescapable, and there is no one to chase after him and rescue him from it. After the funeral, Matt is forced to return to his responsibilities and heads back to RIT and meets with Christy, who has been worried sick about him all week and accuses him of pushing her away. Devastated by the breakup, Matt heads to the gymnasium for practice, but trouble follows him there too. Upon seeing Matt, Coach Ron loses his mind in anger and screams at the top of his lungs, lashing out at Matt for missing a week of practice without notifying anyone. Confused by the visuals of the angry coach, Matt asks the coach to calm down and reminds him that he doesn't understand him. Frustrated, Coach Ron summons Coach Cantrell and continues his lashing out until he learns about what happened from his assistant. Then, sympathizing with Matt, the coach calms down and confesses that he has been covering for Matt's absence, as he would have been disqualified from participating in the Nationals, otherwise, for missing too many practices, and gives him a warning. Following his breakup with Christy and the grief that has taken over his heart, Matt becomes isolated in the next few days and occupies himself with his studies and practice, which also help him push down the pain from the heavy wounds of his heart. Then, one day, Matt decides to make it up for Christy and goes around the campus trying to collect petitions to support the Education of the Deaf Act bill, and succeeds in collecting numerous in just a few hours. Then, hoping to surprise Christy, Matt takes them all to her dorm room, but is disappointed to learn that she's not there and leaves the boxes there. Then, on the day of the national championship, Matt's family, including his old coach Mike, arrives at the university to support him, and he's ecstatic to see them. Then, as the competition kicks off, while waiting for his turn between matches, Matt spends half the time sitting on the corner, closing his eyes, tuning everything out, and centering himself, while spending the other half searching the stands for Karisti with his eyes. As the competition progresses, both Matt and Jason progress smoothly, while Jay is soon disqualified. Then, after all the rounds and grueling matches, Jason and Matt make it to the final and prepare to face each other. Elsewhere, Christy returns to her dorm, finds the petitions, and is warmed by Matt's thoughtful gesture. Hence, she decides to give their relationship a chance and rushes to the gymnasium to support Matt. At the gymnasium, with the final only a few minutes away, Coach Ron and Coach Cantrell gather their team and give them a final team talk.
For Sloan, well, He's looking to be called a 3-time national champion. And the only thing standing in the way is a sophomore walk-on.
Matt walks out to a warm crowd and supportive team members, and the final for the national championship for the light heavyweight title is set on its way. In the first couple of rounds, Matt struggles to score a point against the 2-time champion, and Jason completely dominates the match. Then, in the following round, as Matt tries to do better, Jason brutally wrestles Matt down and injures him in the process. The tension of the room is suddenly broken, and all those on Matt's team are outraged. Coach Ron, who openly challenges the referee's decision to award an injury break without penalizing Jason, is shown a red card and thrown out, leaving Coach Cantrell to take charge. As chaos erupts, with everyone lashing out of stress surrounding Matt and attempting to help him, sheer silence fills Matt as he contemplates his future, and everyone holds their breath in anticipation to see if he is well enough to continue the match. Then, following the determined Jay, everyone starts chanting Matt's name, cheering him on, and signing the hammer, hoping to show them their support through the vibrations of their voice and movement and warm smiles on their faces. As Matt registers this, he is overjoyed to see Christy arrive and prepares to continue the match he's worked all of his life towards. However, Matt struggles in the following round as well, and Jason takes more points. Then, as Matt prepares for the last round, all his life flashes before his eyes in a blur. The sting of childhood bullying, the crushing humiliation of the prom night, the suffocating loneliness and silence he once feared would define him, and the newfound community and friends who finally make him feel at home. As he channels all this into motivation and strength, the unwavering face of Stanley, who had helped him prepare for this moment since he was a child, flashes in his mind and gives him the extra push he needs for triumph. Hence, on the last round, to the sheer joy of the RIT community, his coaches, his teammates, and his proud family, Matt managed to pin down his experienced opponent to win the tournament and carve his name into history forever as the first deaf wrestler to win an NCAA national championship. This one is for you, Stanley.
Unbelievable. He pulled it off. He got the takedown. Matt the Hammer.
In the glow of the celebrations and festivities, Matt and Christy reconcile and resume their relationship. Matt Hamill would go on to win 2 more national titles in 1998 and 1999, graduating with a degree in electrical engineering and earning his place in the NCAA Wrestling Hall of Fame in 2004. Matt and Christy got married in 1999 and have a daughter a year later, while Matt and Jay remain close friends. A few years later, a new arena awaits Matt, the Hammer, and as he is welcomed to the UFC fighting arena as is customary for him, he closes his eyes to concentrate and enjoy the massive vibrations of the thousands of fans cheering the roof off the arena. Standing in the center of the ring, Matt makes history once again as the first deaf UFC fighter and inspires the world.